Described as the national voice for bridging divides, our speaker is founder of Listen First Project and the Listen First Coalition of 400 plus organizations, bringing Americans together across differences. He catalyzes the movement to heal America by building relationships and bridging divides, transforming division and contempt into connection and understanding. He manages large-scale collective campaigns and strategies such as the annual National Week of Conversation to engage as many Americans as possible in this hopeful mission. So let's have a unified, bipartisan welcome for Pearce Godwin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that welcome. It is wonderful to be with you all this morning. I'm honored by the invitation, coming to you from Durham, North Carolina. Was recently in your state, seeing some friends. I've got colleagues all over the country engaged in this mission. And last year I discovered the glory of skiing in the Rockies for the first time and scooted over to California as well to see those friends, and had to repeat that good experience here just over the last month. And as I was on that cross-country road trip, I repeatedly encountered, as so many of you have, and it's so prevalent where you are, the breathtaking beauty, majesty of the place that we call home. The peaks and the plains awaken my own patriotism. The personal pain and national fear that we know prevalent seemed at times so far away. Yet I know that for many of us, it's hitting really close to home. This toxic polarization, the way we demonize each other across differences, is causing breakdown, from the dinner table to family vacation, from the workplace to worship services. It just doesn't feel very good to lose friends, neighbors, and loved ones due to our differences, no matter which side any of us are on. You know, even as I was transfixed by America's natural beauty, I found the serenity I was experiencing repeatedly punctured by antagonistic signs on a tree, on a truck, in a field. You know, unlike the many flags I saw proclaiming love of country, these signs puncturing the landscape proclaimed who their owners were against. They were beacons of fear instead of hope, hate instead of love, judgment instead of grace. You know, how sad the state of our union is today. Abraham Lincoln, quoting Jesus, said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." They weren't playing. And more than half of us, 54%, now say that our fellow Americans pose the biggest threat to the country. This toxic polarization has been described as a singularly virulent and dangerous phenomenon, as our greatest national security vulnerability. Now, nearly all of us, 87%, recognize this threat. 71% rightly conclude that democracy itself is in danger. But today we're telling pollsters that they are our enemies. They're a serious threat. They're downright evil. 1 in 5 Americans say many members of the other side, quote, lack the traits to be considered fully human. And 15% of Republicans and 20% of Democrats say the country would be better off if large numbers of the opposing partisans just died. Wish they just died? I mean, come on. We need to get a grip on ourselves, right? When was the last time murderous rage ended well for anyone? And indeed, when we talk to the experts who witnessed sectarian violence break out in countries all over the world, they're sounding the alarm here at home. They're begging us to grasp what our once exceptional nation could soon become. And indeed, this danger isn't lost on the American people. More than 80% of those responding to an action button that we recently published across media networks said they want a less divided America. This overwhelming demand for a way out of toxic polarization is validated by many recent national surveys. Americans across party lines and demographic groups say that division in the country, is the most important issue facing them personally. And they rank uniting the country as the most important national priority. Yet, as warnings about this so-called toxic polarization and calls for reconciliation grow louder, I hear folks of varying backgrounds and beliefs respond with something like, oh, hell no, not with them. There is this massive amount of distrust, fear, and contempt that's coursing through our American veins. And it can make the idea of engaging with the other seem quite distasteful, even disloyal to our own values and in-group. But to those who reject the idea of engaging across differences, I earnestly ask, what's your end game? And I've heard 4 answers, which I shorthand because I'm a little bit obsessed with alliteration, as delusion, doom, duck, and dash. All right. So many of us behave as if one day we'll vanquish the other side into oblivion and not have to contend with them or their values or anymore. I think that's delusional. Others have just given up hope and think that we're irrevocably destined for another violent civil war. Doom. You know, some have forsaken civic engagement of any kind and secluded themselves with only family and their closest friends. They're ducking from this food fight or worse that we're in the middle of. Finally, I keep running into people who tell me they've got an exit plan. They're going to this, that, or the other place around the world. They're just going to dash. They're going to take off. Instead, you know, obviously, I'm here imploring that we lean in together on what I would humbly see as the only universally plausible, palatable, and prosperous path forward. Told you I liked alliteration. The muscle memory, pointing our fingers out, blame them for all that ails our country, is strong. But there's only one actor in the American story that I can control, and that's myself. And I dare say that might be true for you as well. As I reflect on who we are, I think we as Americans at our best are not passive. We're not weak victims, helpless to determine our fate. No, we are free. We are empowered. We are heroes on the arc of history that must bend toward our nation's promise and founding ideals. But if today, at this moment, is not who we are, if we're too angry, if we're too afraid to turn down the heat and find a way forward together, America will fall, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. So my fellow Americans, I think it's time to show up for each other and for the country we love. My friends at Beyond Conflict identify the quality of social relations as the #1 driver of sustainable peace. They point to the norms and structures shaping the dialogue environment as a key factor. And I think we'd all agree that our democratic republic requires a basic level of trust in and acceptance of those different from ourselves. It thrives when, despite these differences, which are awesome, by the way, in large part, we feel that we are in it together and that each of us belong. When our shared identity as Americans is superordinate to our competing tribal identities. On the other hand, when this affective polarization escalates into sectarianism, our democratic republic is in peril. And that's what we're seeing today. But I'm with the 79% of Americans who recently said they believe creating more opportunities for people to talk with those who have different values and views would be effective in reducing violence. And when assured that they would be listened to respectfully, imagine that, more than 4 times as many Americans, 61%, are interested in talking across differences. Listening with curiosity is the key to successful conversations across differences. Thus, as you heard, the name, the mantra, the common hashtag of the Bridging Movement's Listen First Coalition of 400 plus organizations, bringing Americans together across differences. Seeing an escalating crisis of this toxic polarization and believing the best way to turn the tide is by working together, or I just really like friends and doing things together. 4 of our bridging organizations, Listen First Project, which is mine, something called Village Square out of California, Living Room Conversations, National Institute for Civil Discourse, created this Listen First Coalition in 2017 to aggregate, align, and amplify many diffuse bridging efforts to reach farther, to impact greater than any one of us could alone. And I'll share just a bit about all the work that's going on across the country. You know, we've kind of bucketed the intervention strategies across these hundreds of partners now in our coalition as 4 E's. The alliteration just keeps going. But engage with one another, especially across differences. Some are more focused on exposing Americans to diverse information, to diverse perspectives. Others are about educating Americans directly about how and why we've become so polarized. And finally, some focus on elevating how we see ourselves and others beyond these confining and conflicting identities. Some partners focus on dialogue around personal experience to build relationships, while others of our partners focus on deliberation on particular issues. Some work in local communities, others engage Americans coast to coast. Some convene Americans in person, while others convene virtually. Some engage a broad audience, while others target students or policymakers or people of faith or other segments. Some engage everyday Americans directly, while others produce high-profile conversations or multimedia to model for and inspire the rest of us. Some engage via conversation, while others facilitate collaboration on tangible projects. So after we put this whole coalition together in 2017, in 2018, more than 100 partner organizations created the first annual National Week of Conversation. And our Listen First Coalition has powered this annual National Week of Conversation every year, which now kicks off starting last year with the Galvanizing America Talks event in deep partnership with USA Today, drawing their readers and many more Americans into this bridging movement, into the work of our partners and the mission of healing America. And hopefully 2/3 of Americans still agree that in the end, we're all Americans. And 3/4 believe it is still possible for the US to achieve the ideal of our national motto, E pluribus unum, from many people, one. But we've got to match that hope with action before it's too late. America's warning lights, I'm sure we'd all agree, are blinking red. And the question is, what will you do now? Most immediately, I invite every patriotic American, every person who wants to relieve the pain and paralysis of division, to show up April 21st or 23rd when we pioneer that together at America Talks, a unique opportunity for fellow Americans who refuse to give up on our country. It's a chance to enjoy a one-on-one or small group conversation via online video with folks of varied backgrounds and beliefs. Let's see here. America Talks will kick off the 5th annual National Week of Conversation. That'll include hundreds of additional opportunities to join fellow Americans in conversations across differences. Just yesterday, some of the remarks I just shared with you all were featured by USA Today in an op-ed that accompanied their press release and their news article. And a little behind inside baseball side note, the opinion editor the other night said, "Oh, Pearce, the opinion page looks so good tomorrow. You're going to love it." I'm like, what is she talking about? So then I drove all the way across Durham, North Carolina yesterday to find the one paper that was at the Harris Teeter. But anyway, hope you get yours directly if you still like the paper version. But USA Today put, my op-ed there right beside Ukrainian President Zelensky. We've touched on it already this morning. A call for us to live up to our highest ideals, which was, of course, deeply moving to see this mission we're on, this call that I've made to you all this morning and made to USA Today's readers yesterday as a response to that inspiring call, to the heroism we're seeing in that part of the world. Indeed, we need all hands on deck to meet this pivotal moment, which is why I'm so grateful that influencers across sectors are now leaning into this mission with us. In the past year, we've earned significant investment from the business sector, which I know you all represent. My dad was a proud Rotarian. I get to the meetings here in Durham when I can. The business sector is going to be critical from local to national to positive culture change. We're excited to be partnering now with Walmart, Target, McDonald's, Microsoft, Harley-Davidson, Dick's Sporting Goods, Boston Beer, Petco, Chipotle, iHeartMedia, Google News, Twitter, and others. We've enjoyed a deepening partnership I already mentioned with USA Today, as also Fox News and Wall Street Journal and PBS have elevated our message in recent months. I'm tremendously energized by the attention, by the momentum building around our collective work. Again, as it's just hitting close to home for all Americans. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you were Mike Pence's top aide who cried at dinner with me the other day, talking about friends breaking up with him because of his work in the Trump White House, or you're a corporate CEO, or you're a former militiaman breaking down into tears. It's hitting close to home for all of us. But the challenge and the forces against us could not be more daunting. And in my own moments of doubt, I go back to what a battle-scarred partisan operative said to me last year after hearing my passionate pitch, as you all have, for healing America. He said, "Pearce, think you may be on a futile mission, but we have to swing for it. And with your help, friends, we're taking the strongest possible swing. I think our country and our fellow Americans are worth fighting for." Again, I'm honored to be with you all this morning. Happy to take any questions you have about the mission, about the work. Share your own personal stories of how this division and distrust is impacting your family, your workplace. And if we run out of Q&A, I also brought a couple of my favorite questions from some of these large scale events.
That's a good idea.
Start with that.
All right, wait, hey, kind of a break, a little bit of segue here. My friend Jeff is on Zoom right now from Poland. And if he has, I'd love to slip him in here just for a couple seconds. I know he's really trying about 12 things at once while he's driving. Jeff, you still on? You were on a second ago.
I think he dropped.
We just dropped him, bummer. Okay, well, I'll let it go with that, but I'll start with a question while waiting for Jeff to come back. What role do you see in the media as getting the two sides separated, right? Because you read an article here at Big News, or someplace else that doesn't even exist. Thanks for coming so much here.
Thank you. Great question. There have been events in recent years, to your point, I'll take part of that and then the other part, in which I said, my goodness, I knew that I was fighting my own worst instincts, but also let me not be so hard on myself and the rest of us. It's all social biology, right? We are, for a very long time, wired for belonging, wired to find safety and security with our in-groups, and wired to fear exclusion from those groups, wired to fear threat from other groups. So that's all, fine and dandy. It's who we are as humans. It's obviously gotten turbocharged in recent years, in which some of those survival instincts that we may have needed earlier are turned on folks that just have a different opinion. But anyway, I digress. So I knew that we were combating that in myself as much as anybody else. But have noted, as you said, my gosh, in many ways, we're living in different realities. Not to use the cliche that frankly drives me crazy, but your truth is not my truth, and your lies are not my lies, and it's just, oh my goodness, we're not even on the same playing field. That is a massive barrier, right, to having any conversation on a particular issue. It might be an insurmountable barrier, which is why personally more and more I just come back to, can we just see each other as humans? Can we just find some common values? Can we just understand, oh my gosh, you don't have horns and two heads and want to eat me? That very basic point may be the starting point. I'm going to give you just kind of, inside thinking. I don't do company lines. We're just having a candid conversation here. I'm very resistant, and always have been, to kind of contradicting our mission by making any group of fellow Americans the enemy, right? That's the whole us versus them we're trying to get beyond. At the same time, I think you're obviously right, and it's very fair, and we've tested, literally, in national surveys, tested the idea of kind of making social media, cable news, divisive politicians, something, a common enemy that we might rally against. Obviously, and I work, as you heard, with some of these companies, and given my business background, I have a certain level of sympathy. I mean, we're giving them market incentives that, ooh, please divide me, anger me. But absolutely, that is tremendously deleterious and only perpetuating the problem. I think there are so many, including, as you just named, media, social media, those market incentives. And again, I really always try to look in the mirror. What are we demanding? I mean, why are they providing that? Because some critical mass of us are feeding off of it. But 100%, that and so many other things are to blame, are at fault, but no one of them is sufficient as the explanation. There are at least dozens. I've seen more than 50 listed, but you obviously nailed one that we're feeling in our everyday lives that is, it's literally programmed to divide us and turn us against each other.
Pearce, thanks so much for your message, your effort, your mission. I think it is more than laudable, and thank goodness somebody's doing it. I really appreciate you being here to talk with us today. My question is simple, but I would just distill it as saying the gap that I'm having a real hard time bridging, that I simply cannot bridge, is the disinformation. And I say dis instead of even misinformation, disinformation. How do we talk to each other when we can't agree on basic facts? For example, in my family of the 2020 election, I'll just leave it at that. I can't get to politics. I can't get to being curious about you if we can't agree on what the actual facts are about things that were counted or not. So what do we do there? For me, that is a huge impediment right now. We can't even agree on basic facts, and we can talk about the rest, right? Please.
Yeah, great question. And let me try to practice what I preach first and not there's other questions. I think it depends on where the conversation starts. And if what you're saying is, hey, until we agree, we can't have a conversation. Well, okay, I don't think that's gonna go very well. I think, again, and it's sad, but I think it's reality. We've got to back it up. And you've also, I mean, look, I'm not asking everybody. I promise to talk out of both sides of my mouth. All of us appreciate conversations with people with whom we share interest, we share understanding, share worldview. That is, like, we don't need to castigate that. It's fine. It's wonderful. So I think that, first of all, there's a judgment around, is this relationship one that's important to me? Obviously, in what you're talking about, it's your family. And so, I would encourage just taking several steps back from the 2020 election, January 6th, whatever, and getting back to, and you can say this literally or not, but, hey, you matter to me. I want to be in conversation with you. I want to have a relationship with you. I care about you. I am curious to better understand some of your views on this. And let me double click on the curiosity. Listen with curiosity is the #1 agreement and norm in any of these large scale events. Listen with curiosity, speak from your own experience, not from your favorite person on television, and connect with respect, those three. So I think my advice, for what it's worth, is just to take several steps back and to not lead with any issue, any point of division, but you really have to lead with that curiosity. And maybe there's some people that are so hardened that they're just not going to have it. And you know what? Go on and take a walk in the park and talk to somebody who's worth more of your time. But I really think there's got to be a first mover who is going to turn down that heat, who is going to be genuinely curious. And it's hard for all of us, right? We want to say, how could you believe that? That's just going to put us on our heels, right? And there's all sorts of fascinating psychological research that says the more facts you give somebody, the more they dig in opposition to those facts. So good luck with that. Turns out we're not rational beings. Spoiler alert. And so I just leading with that curiosity and starting with something different. There are ways to split the difference, if it's about, and I'm making this up on the fly, it's what I do. But if it really is the 2020 election that kind of can't be put aside, I would go a direction like, listen, what are your fears? What are your concerns? around this. And oh, I saw a video of this, I saw a video of that. Okay, that's fine. But what are you concerned about? Well, I'm really concerned that our elections need to be secure. I want to make sure that they're fair. My gosh, I share those concerns too. That is a really huge value to me. I'm right there with you. We got to make sure these elections are secure and fair. I also want to make sure that our fellow Americans, as appropriate and with that security and fairness in mind, can vote. Just get out of the facts that you're not going to agree on, get out of kind of the conclusions and get to what's really animating who we are. That's the middle ground. Again, the all the way back that may be required is just, look, can we leave that aside? Because this relationship is more important to me than what you think about this, that, or the other issue. You are important to me. Let's work on that relationship together.
Pearce, my father was a very conservative, proud Republican for many, many years. I'm sure if he were alive, he'd be very upset about what's going on in our politics today in his party. And I wonder, is there really hope unless we can get to the people at Fox News? You mentioned Fox News was one of the supporters of your organization. And when you watch Fox News on the local news channels, they are very reputable reporters. But then when you see what's going on in Fox News on the cable network, where they're having people like Hannity and Carlson talking, is there any chance that your organization or the coalition of your organizations can reach out to the people who make those decisions, who allow the kinds of things that we hear on those programs be altered so that we can address some of the issues that you're raising? There's no question that what you are doing is absolutely necessary. But it just seems to me that with social media, that the hatred that we're seeing on social media from both sides, and what we hear on these cable programs, on both sides, frankly, we just got to get to the people that make these decisions somehow. Is there any chance you're going to get any of those boardrooms to listen to your message?
Thanks so much for the question. I'm not holding my breath. Let me give you a framework that some of my friends use. It's demand side and supply side. So I'm all about the demand side. I'm all about what you and I as individuals can do. What are we demanding, from a very market business sense? What kind of incentives are we providing to those boardrooms, to social media companies? And then others, to your point, yours was a supply side question. Goodness gracious, can't we just turn out the faucet of toxicity from wherever it's from? And I think, just based on market incentives that I know everybody in this room appreciates, that there's not a strong chance of that, right? I mean, and let me extrapolate not just to the media, but also politicians. There are some people, we all have our favorite ones, I'm not going to name names, but there are some people who will take a step of courage and say things, do things that are in defiance of or despite their incentives. Oh my gosh, we're giving politicians in Washington, those evil people, whatever, the worst incentives in the world for so many reasons. I don't even need to digress. And there's some people in those boardrooms you mentioned for media companies. There's some people in elected leadership who will say, you know what, nah, my principles, I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to step out despite my incentives, despite the negative effect it might have on me. But I think just from a human perspective, that's going to be a fairly small share, certainly smaller than it would be if we, the people, gave incentives to do the right thing and they didn't even have to fall back on their principles. So I'm really doggedly focused on it demanding us as individual Americans, creating a different demand for our media, for our politicians, and anybody else who has some influence over the toxicity that we are consuming, in some cases, whether we want to or not. I'll be specific about the Fox News in that Brett Baer, amazing guy. I don't care what you say about Fox News. I want to be careful what you believe. I want to be careful and tread lightly and not play the blame game. But Brett's an amazing guy, very much straight newsman, and he's had me on to talk about it was last year for this National Week Conversation America Talk. So that's what I was referring to. It's not a kind of corporate support, but at least being willing to put the idea out there. And obviously there's some that are for it and some that may say, oh, heck no, this is directly counter to my message, to what my audience wants. And so, no, we're not going to talk about this unity stuff. Long story short, would love it if we could just call on the better angels of some folks to turn down the spigot that is polluting us. But I'm not holding my breath. And in the meantime, seeing what we can do to have a critical mass of Americans say, you know what, we're just not going to do it this way, and we're not going to watch you if you do. And you better believe it would change at that point.
Next question is, let's talk about, we would discuss children and our grandchildren. They frequently will adopt the attitudes of their parents. Can you tell us what is being done so that this problem, this cancer, is not being replicated in our children, mostly in this room, probably grandchildren? Please discuss.
Thank you for that question. You look much more put together, clean cut, sir, than the last person who talked to me about grandchildren. It was one of my favorite folks, Robert, who's a former militiaman, and just out of central casting with his big old burly beard and steel worker in Kansas. He's amazing. I love Robert. But when I mentioned seeing a former militiaman break down crying, it was Robert talking about his grandchildren, saying, look, I'm friends with these people. I used to be one of these people who are literally have their battle plans and have their arms and are ready to take out the grid. I mean, it's horrifying. I won't go too far down that rail, but he starts crying, and this, incredibly intimidating, imposing figure is saying, but I don't want to leave this kind of country to my grandchildren, this division. I'll never forget that. I have a number of groups in this coalition who are focused on the next generation, on Generation Z, on high schools, middle schools, colleges. Honestly, I've had kind of conflicting reports. On the one hand, I'm hearing, you know what, the younger folks are looking at the rest of us saying, what's wrong with y'all? Get a life. This division, they're kind of done with both parties, and they're in some ways not as gripped by the us versus them. On the other hand, when it comes to this idea of kind of canceling those with whom we disagree, saying you're not even allowed to utter that kind of viewpoint, that is something, of course, that we've seen on college campuses and lower that has become pervasive, and I personally think is a real threat. Obviously, there's a balance. I'm glad I'm not the person who has to make the decision, but speech really being constrained based on what's kind of allowable opinion or dissent. So, I wish I had a better answer for you, sir. There are organizations who are working on it and are addressing that younger population. But I hate to keep pointing the finger into the mirror, but I think it's up to us and the kind of norms we're setting, the kind of examples we're setting for our kids, for our grandkids, the kind of values we're instilling in them, the kind of, I hate to use it, it's a kind of fluffy word, but the kind of empathy, the kind of curiosity, the kind of acceptance of difference, the curiosity to say, you know what, hey, sorry, I'm going on a total tangent, but obviously there's the monikers out there that are totally insulting about snowflakes and stuff. But on that point, I think there's probably something too, saying, you know what, it is okay to disagree. It's okay to be offended even, but see if you can't lead with curiosity. See if you can't wonder where that person in your classroom is coming from, and kind of be that beacon, be that hero in your classroom who is curious and is choosing grace over judgment. It honestly comes down to norms. At whatever age we're talking about, what norms are we adopting as a people? If nothing else, stuck between these lines on a map, what norms are we adopting in how we interact with each other? And exemplifying that for the younger folks in our lives and encouraging them to do better than we've done.